1. Spoilers for Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I have a guy in my group, totally cool in real life, but generally kind of a dick during D&D. In our actual campaign at the time, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, we had multiple roleplay interactions. Throughout the story that didn't involve combat, me, High Elf Paladin, and our other member, Tiefling Barbarian, generally followed these interactions as it both fit with our characters' alignments and goals. However, Dragonborn Ranger could not fathom that we could ever be peaceful. He insisted on stabbing people, punching people, and full murder hoboing every NPC ever. Normally this wouldn't really bother me, but it's hard to watch our DM, a great guy, try to roleplay before getting cut off with, "I roll to stab him in the throat." Eventually, we reached the gold dragon vault. I, being a paladin, decided to respect that we had no claim on the gold, and that we should leave it. Barbarian wanted it for himself. This created a roleplay moment where we weighed pros and cons and morality over the situation. However, this engagement was shortly crapped upon by the ranger, who dared to utter, "I should have poisoned arrow at the man." He then also had the nerve to call me a prick for arguing with the party, and that I have a stick up my rear end. Listen, I hate when people say, "It's what my character would do," but come on, I'm a paladin. I wouldn't stand for murdering this man for his money. Anyways, that's not the worst. Murder hobos are no crazy thing in D&D. The worst is when D, not his name, ran a one-shot. D was very new, and he was super excited to try it out, and he fleshed out a campaign based around Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I went in with an Air Genasi warlock who made a deal with the businessman of the underworld for a ticket, as it was his dad's dying wish to see the factory. He played a human bard. 10 minutes in, and he immediately says, "Stick my winner into the chocolate statue." DM is audibly uncomfortable and says, "Okay, roll strength." He does, rolls like a 5. Your winner is crushed and is absolutely useless. He gets annoyed. "Why do I have to roll strength for that?" It's hard chocolate, dude. Anyway, after him proceeding to threaten and other actions on every NPC and PC possible, he eventually accidentally is pushed into a giant cotton candy twisty thing. Instantly torn apart. Normally, I don't like an insta-kill, but he deserved it. I have to deal with him for the rest of Mad Mage and other campaigns. It's sad, because he's a nice guy in real life, but it's painfully obvious that he's taking his anger and frustration out on a game that the rest of us are trying to enjoy. Hellfreezer's note, I would add that if he's acting like this in-game, knowingly making things more difficult for other people, and he must know by now, maybe he's not that nice of a guy in real life. Maybe he's just really good at wearing a mask and pretending he is. I hope I'm wrong, but it happens a lot. 2. Years ago, I ran a Deathwatch, D100 RPG set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe campaign. As I'd never run a campaign with this group before, I used the setting that they'd created and started an adventure from one of the sourcebooks. The campaign was only designed to be about 10 sessions long, as many of us were dipping our toes into our first ever RPG. The people involved in this merry little adventure were DM, me, an occasionally bumbling but well-intentioned DM, Alpha, the guy in our group who considered himself the de facto leader and had to be the star of the show. Played a Blood Angel. Think Space Marine Vampire. Assault Marine. Simp, the Alpha's best friend. Were it not for the fact that they were both in relationships, I'd have assumed that Alpha and Simp were in a relationship due to Simp's constant fawning over Alpha. Played a Storm Warden, an angry Scotsman librarian, psyker. Innocent bystander number 1, the average normal member of our group, and the only person who was just along for the ride and happy to be involved in the story. Played a Space Wolf, Viking librarian. Innocent bystander number 2, another person who just wanted to play. He was friends with Simp and joined because he heard about it and always wanted to give it a go. Played an Imperial Fists. Think Charlemagne-era Frank, tactical marine. It all seemed to start well. There were epic battles, cunning investigations, and stealthy insertions into enemy bases. However, on or about the 3rd session, I started to notice something. Both Alpha and Simp not only led the interactions with NPCs, but their questioning was a little too perfect. It was almost like they not only knew exactly what to ask, but also exactly what each NPC was going to tell them. I started to get a bit suspicious. The first thing I did was to introduce a new NPC. To my surprise, not only did Alpha and Simp not lead the engagement, they almost didn't ask any questions at all. I then switched roles and information for 2 other NPCs. Cue the visible frustration and anger from both PCs as they realized that something was up. At this point, my suspicions were confirmed. Both players had obtained a copy of the sourcebook and were metagaming. Then I realized that both players were also gearing up for the final battle against the big bad evil guy, tailoring their war gear and skills to take him down hard. So I made a few more tweaks, shifting the faction that the big bad evil guy led, as they'd taken a skill that gave rerolls against that faction, and giving it some toughness bonuses at the expense of its armor. The weapons chosen traded higher armor penetration for damage dealt. And I waited. Come the final battle, both of them were floored when I explained the big bad evil guy, and they realized their skills and weapons were not effective. By contrast, the 2 innocent bystanders who had not min-maxed had a much better time of the fight. At one point, Simp started to complain that this was all wrong and almost admitted that he had read the book, only to be kicked under the table by Alpha. At the end of the session, the team prevailed and the big bad evil guy was dead. I should have known something was up when Alpha suggested that they still had a few sessions left. This was true, and 2 of them had expedited the RP element so much that what I planned for 10 sessions only took 8. Alpha also suggested that he DM, as I deserved the chance to play too. I agreed. Despite my BS meter tingling, sure enough, I was right on the money as my PC got pummeled. Melee and bad guys would literally run straight past Simp and the 2 innocent bystanders at me. Shooting bad guys would leave themselves hideously exposed if it meant they had one shot at me. Worse still, Alpha wrote the ending so that the team died and the entire universe was doomed. It left such a bad taste in everyone's mouth that both the campaign end and our friend group splintered within a few short weeks. 3. Okay, so RPG nights are bound to run sometimes, but let me tell you about the absolute marathon session that our group managed to put together. I jumped right off the rails so hard that it turned into some hellish horror story, to which even now I am still in disbelief. Our GM Alex had this great big finale planned for our campaign. He had been hyping it for weeks. I guess at the time all of us were psyched, and none of us really got the idea of, hey, it's going to be like practically living at the table for a day and a half. It started off epic. Deep dives, challenges taken face on, the whole enchilada. 5 hours later, and when all is supposed to be said and done, a new curve is thrown at us. Alrighty, whatever, we're in for a penny, in for a pound, more or less. But 10 hours later, seriously, are we still doing this? The first to crack, Jess. Guys, it's 3 in the morning, this is nuts. But then Alex had spouted off his whole spiel of, this is our big epic conclusion, we can't leave that hanging. And we'd all been way too into this campaign, or thought we had, so we stayed because, loyalty, right? So it gets to be dawn, and I swear by it. Mark is a peacemaker by far, making cracks about how I started some new record. You can tell he's at the end of his rope now, baked as the rest of us, having made it so far on sheer fumes and bull-headedness. A couple of folks just bailed out, we can't blame them. They muttered what sounded like an apology, and all looked for the world like just released hostages. In fact, one of our players fell asleep. Full on snoring. We're half tempted to join her, but no, we're in too deep. At some point in the night, can't pinpoint when, I was so tired I stopped trying to keep track of time. Randy got up from the table without a word and walked on out. I assumed he was leaving, but Alex asked him where he was going. To where he replied, "Car, I'll be right back." 2 minutes later, he brings back a baggie of no-no snow and continues the game. I personally wouldn't touch the stuff with a 10-foot pole, but we all like to rave, so gave him a slightly disapproving look and move on. I then stand questioning my life decisions under my breath. Why the hell are we out here? Alex, by that point, seeming much more manic than passionate, brained on about how we were his best players and he prepared this thing for us, and then how he took these efforts to challenge us. It honestly felt more like a guilt trip than an honor. Well, the sun has come up and set, and it's like we just crossed into some bizarro land of gaming where time means nothing. And when you actually defeat the boss, there's no cheering. Mostly it's just kinda too tired to be relieved that it's finally done. We pack up in silence, no big celebration. It's more like a bunch of zombies shuffling out, surprised by how a game can become a test of endurance. With hindsight being what it has now turned into an urban legend in the midst of us. Not inordinately because of the campaign as it was, but especially due to the sheer madness of the push far beyond any sane boundary. So why did we tough it out? Sheer stubbornness? A loyalty to whatever the hell? A misplaced sense of duty to see it through? Who knows? Setting limits was a lesson already learned, and that doubled for RPGs apparently. To all you gamers out there, take heed of the terrible tale of your poor comrade. When an epic game night strays into the territory of spill your secrets and then let's admit defeat, it's time to break out the Game Gear. I mean, do not let it get like us, painted into a corner by a game where it's entirely ceased to be fun. It is supposed to be a game, not some endurable test of your life. 4. I need some advice because this has recently brought up some problems in my D&D game. I need to know if I'm in the wrong, slightly in the wrong, or justified for my actions. I'm playing a druid in a D&D campaign that is a runaway princess of a very well-known kingdom in the land. Now, I hate the lone wolf thing, so as soon as the party helped my druid find out, and she felt like she could trust them, she revealed the truth to them. Her goal for traveling was to become a better ruler for her kingdom. She felt as if she couldn't properly guide her kingdom if she properly had a silver spoon stuck in her mouth. She wanted to explore the world, see where people needed aid, and when finally took the throne, she would have the knowledge of the world and its state, to be able to better make long-lasting connections with other kingdoms, and know who would be valuable allies and who were threats. When this information was revealed, my druid said it was important that the party continues to refer to her as the fake name she crafted, and do not let anyone know she's a princess. One reason is she worries she will not be able to gather information properly if people already know her status, because they'll put on a face for her. And she fears her family will learn of her location and send the knights to bring her back home. Everyone seemed to understand this except the sorcerer. He would constantly refer to her as princess or use her real name when in the presence of other people. At one point, sorcerer and paladin had ran into a knight from her hometown looking for her. He held up a flyer with her face, and paladin feigned ignorance, and sorcerer said, "Oh, that looks just like druid. And she mentioned she was a princess before." Luckily, paladin managed a decent deception check to make it seem like the sorcerer was only after the reward, as sorcerer kept insisting he could show the knight where I was. After this happened, I had my druid stay in a completely different tavern, and the only one who didn't know was the sorcerer, who later found the knight and tried bringing him to my now empty room, making paladin's claims he was only after the reward for my capture seem even more true. This continued for several sessions. Anytime the information of my character's royal status could be used to screw her over, sorcerer blurted it out, claiming it wasn't his problem and his character didn't understand why my character would hide such a secret, no matter how many times I explained it to him, or he would claim he forgot. It got to the point I didn't enjoy playing my character and regretted not playing the stereotypical lone wolf that wouldn't trust the party with her secrets until she was forced to, or until session 1000. We eventually visited a rival kingdom, and after having heard of our deeds, he invited us to dinner through an invitation. Now this king was meant to be a deadly threat. He was not only a rival to my kingdom, but was supposedly the same person who had attacked our rogue's hometown, separating him from his family and selling him as a slave. Rogue and my druid began making plans, intending on sharing our recent discoveries and the invitation with the group. But Rogue stopped her and told her he wanted to share this information with everyone except Sorcerer. Sorcerer's player seemed taken aback, and he asked why we would keep that from him. Rogue and I explained that his character was terrible at keeping secrets. He was constantly telling everyone who my character was, and there were several occasions this nearly screwed us over. We couldn't risk him attending the party and telling the king who she or the rogue was, because he would certainly kill them on sight. Rogue wanted revenge, and my character wanted to get rid of a threat to her kingdom. This was especially important to Rogue's backstory, since his character has stated multiple times how he craved revenge against the man that took everything from him. Sorcerer defended his character's actions with something that sounded very similar to, "It's what my character would do." And Rogue told him this is how our characters would react to his actions, and there were consequences to being a blabbermouth. DM did warn Rogue and I that this would mean that in the next session, Sorcerer could have little to no playtime, since the dinner portion and our plans to sneak around his castle would take up the majority of the session. The session ended with Rogue and I about to call a meeting with Paladin and our wizard. The next morning, Sorcerer had typed a long message in the Discord chat about how he didn't feel it was fair he'd be excluded from a plotline this important and wanted to be there to get XP like the rest of us. I'm starting to feel bad. I don't want to exclude Sorcerer from the activities, but at the same time, doesn't see any fault in him constantly announcing our character's secrets and putting them at a disadvantage. And the worst part is, he never said he wouldn't do that if we took him into the king's dinner with us, which makes me even more hesitant to bring him. Rogue is adamant about not telling his character anything, but I don't want to make him sit out an entire session. What should I do? I have 2 weeks to make a choice on whether or not my character will tell Sorcerer about the invitation. Hellfreezer's note: do not tell him. I think he's consistently proven, whether he thinks it's a funny thing to do in-game or whether he really just doesn't like you as a person, he's going to do everything he can to make your gaming session more difficult. He's been repeatedly given opportunities not to behave that way, and he's shown no care or interest in being a team player, and only seems to want to sow seeds of chaos, so no. Actions have consequences, so let him reap the consequences of his actions. Maybe he'll learn a lesson, or maybe he can sit out a few more games. 5. I ran a free online post-apocalyptic game that I advertised as a Mad Max Road Warrior-style mini-campaign. The write-up and images depict a scrappy group of people within a few decades after a global cataclysm, eking out a harsh living in the blasted desert wasteland. High-speed chases in rusty cars and motorcycles, spiked leather, improvised weapons, etc. The kind of place you need to fight to survive. The first person to join is a talkative guy who touts himself as a professional GM who runs daily games. Friendly and excited to be a player after having to run all the time. Understandable, and I'm glad to have an experienced person on board. From day one, he starts posting a lot of goofy memes and animated GIFs on my dedicated Discord server for the game. It seems excessive, and it gets kind of annoying when my announcements about the game get spammed off the screen. But I write it off as simple enthusiasm, and don't want to discourage that. We chat a few times before game date about the setting and character concepts, and he decides he wants to play the son of the local clan chief and warlord. Sounds reasonable, and I don't check it too closely because he's a veteran player and there are newbies who need more attention. So game day, he launches out of the gate making plans and ordering the others around. This can sometimes happen unintentionally with proactive forever GMs, who are used to running the show. But in this case he justifies it in-game by the fact that he is the son of the war chief, and that makes him the natural leader. This is a group of strangers, so you can imagine that everyone starts to bristle at this. I try to mitigate as best I can by limiting his speaking time and asking each person individually what they do during the action, so as not to allow the guy to speak for others. He is relentless though, and all the while he's spamming the channels with animations and links to videos and songs. On the first break, I ask him to slow it down. When the action inevitably comes to a fight, which was the stated foundation of this setting, it turns out this guy's character is actually the pampered son of the war chief. 0 combat skills, 0 driving skills, overweight and clumsy, and actually has a mental aversion to conflict. He doesn't even have any leadership or persuasion skills, despite being the purported leader. He pumped all of his points into being a mechanic. I'm pretty sure he changed it from my initial scan because I would have noticed this on his character sheet. So the group has to basically save him, which no one wants to do because he's grating on everyone's nerves. At the end of the first encounter, one of the other players quits the game. We limp on a bit and then wrap the session. Afterwards, another player angrily messages me, leaves the game, and blocks me. The campaign is dead, and I've lost the motivation to recruit anyone else. It was my fault for being lulled by this guy's disruptive behavior and interpreting it as misplaced enthusiasm, but I couldn't help think later that some of it might have been intentional. The guy bragged about how many thousands of hours he's logged running games. So you think he would know what would fly as a decent player and what is just being a problem. Not sure if he really did it on purpose or why he would want to, but he certainly should have known better. Anyway, now I'm a lot more cautious about setting up games with strangers. Hellfreezer's note, pure speculation. The guy sounds very neckbeardy to me. I know we haven't touched on them in this channel for a while, but I expect he might have been lying about his experience, just trying to sound like a big man. Could be wrong, but if you're that good at something, you don't really need to brag about it that much. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 20-Sided Dunce, Episode 9. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, if you could please hit the like button, I would appreciate it. And if you'd like to get early access to these videos, you can get that on Monday by supporting me on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. You'll also find links in there to the Hellfreezer Discord and the merchandise store, which is on Teespring these days. And if you especially enjoyed today's video, then why not leave a tip? You can do that by clicking on the heart with the $sign underneath the video. And while you don't have to do that at all, it is very much appreciated and has been helping me a lot. Thank you kindly. Okay, as we've no other business today, let's move right along to today's question and answer of the day. And today's question is: what was the last thing you saw, like in a movie or a TV show, or just, you saw it somewhere and thought, oh, that's quite nice, I think I'd like to own that, I wonder if I can? For me, it's quite simple. I was rewatching What We Do in the Shadows last night, one of my favourite movies, seen it a few times. And there's a character called Deacon in that, and at one point in the movie, near the end, he's wearing a knitted sweater. And it's this pattern where it's a black sweater, I believe, but on the front, the patterns are quite complicated. I've been assured by one of my moderators who knows a bit about knitting, it's quite a complicated pattern, where it's a sunset, I'm going to assume, because Deacon's a vampire, and it's different patterns as the light of the sun kind of fades in. Then you've got shadowy trees, and kind of like a reddish sky. And I thought, that's quite nice, I'd like to have that. So I looked, hoping that it was something they purchased for the movie that maybe you could buy. Unfortunately, no. I'm guessing it was something maybe made for the film, and you can't seem to buy them. So what I did find was people on Etsy who are actually making them, but because there's so much work involved in it, they're very expensive. Starting at £300 and up, depending on the size, I assume. So, a dream dashed, what can I say? Why don't you let me know what your answers are in a comment below. And before we go, let's have the answer of the day from a previous video. And today's answer comes from L. And this was in relation to what movie have you most recently watched? Poor Things with Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo, and Willem Dafoe. The movie is provocative. Emma and Mark reach some comedic high notes, and Emma's lead role suffers from the Halle Berry effect. A woman must scourge herself to get an Oscar nom, where Halle Berry had to do it with Billy Bob Thornton in Monsters Ball. Well, that's unfortunate. I guess not everybody can be as lucky as Marissa Tomei. Okay. With that, I'm gonna head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.